I remember the first time someone called my creation their baby. I nearly chuckled. My financial analytics platform wasn't a baby. It was a lifeline, a fierce act of defiance, a raw mechanism for survival. I built it during the most isolating winter of my life, huddled in a worn blanket, my fingers aching with carpal tunnel, while another final notice was taped to my apartment door. Back then, it wasn't about revolutionizing finance. It was purely about keeping a roof over my head and the lights on. Now, that complex code was the very core of an entire company. Yet I, Luna Hayes, was still positioned at the same desk I'd been assigned 8 years ago, nestled between the new intern's incessant sniffing and a wilting desk plant. The only view from my window was a concrete wall, perpetually grim and damp. On my desk sat a simple ceramic mug, the words "Embrace the Journey" chipped on its side. That chip had been there for 5 years. I never replaced it. It felt honest, a constant reminder. They gave me a top contributor plaque once. My name was spelled incorrectly. I never made a fuss. I didn't wear designer clothes, didn't engage in office gossip. I wrote clean, potent code, the kind that simply worked, the kind that ensured jobs, the kind that despite multiple leadership changes, 2 corporate takeovers, and a rapid immersion in corporate jargon, still quietly powered the firm's flagship product. Not that anyone mentioned my name during investor briefings. No, it was always referred to as Quantum Leap Analytics or Nexus Financial AI, whatever buzzword the marketing director had fabricated that quarter. And I let it go, because that was the understanding, literally. The initial prototype, a bare-bones system held together with open-source components, was technically sold for a mere $100. A handshake deal in a bustling diner with the CEO's distant cousin, who genuinely believed blockchain was a new brand of coffee. I signed it over in exchange for a stable position and a seat at the table. But I was no fool. I had spent the week prior to that sale submerged in legal research, meticulously drafting the entire contract myself, fueled by free online PDFs and endless cups of black coffee. A critical clause, tucked away in subsection 7.3.1b, footnoted with a deliberately dull title, Substantial Role Modification and Reassignment Reversion, was my safeguard. It was legally shielded, camouflaged in tedious language. It stated, in essence, that if they ever demoted me, or rather significantly altered my role without mutual agreement, I could repurchase it all for the exact price I had sold it, 1 crisp $100 bill. The clause had remained dormant ever since. Leadership shifted, the product evolved, and new departments sprouted like weeds around my codebase, enveloping it in complex terminology, obscuring its origins. Yet, my login credentials never changed. They still depended on me, even if they had forgotten why. Then, one afternoon in April, a new vice president, Mark from Chicago, arrived, tasked with reorganizing for scalability. Suddenly, my daily stand-ups were canceled, my project roadmap became optional, and a new platform strategist began adding condescending comments to my Git commits as if I had no idea what I was doing. I had witnessed this pattern before, in startups, during mergers, even in high school group projects. It was always the same tactic: make the stable, reliable person feel irrelevant, subtly marginalize them with smiles, gently push them out with feigned compliments. But this time, I didn't react. I quietly printed my original contract and slipped it into a manila folder alongside a $100 check dated 8 years ago. I stored it in my filing cabinet beneath a stack of vendor invoices no one ever asked me to process. I didn't need to see it daily. Simply knowing it was there was sufficient. Let them forget. Let them call it their platform. Let them name features after the CEO's golf score. I had patience, I had memory, and I had leverage. They labeled it a strategic partnership, but it felt more like a dismantling. New logo, new mission. New corporate overlords who had flown in from some tech incubator in Boston. They arrived in trendy vests and sockless loafers, all radiating smiles and synergy, brandishing words like disruptive integration and agile capital deployment as if they were sacred texts. One of them introduced himself as the Chief Innovation Architect and enthusiastically fist-bumped the janitor. Within days, HR was rebranded as People Operations, and every Slack channel was filled with unironic gifs of visionary CEOs. I kept my silence. I wore my practical gray cardigan like armor. My keyboard was still the loudest in the room, its mechanical keys a little too clicky for open-plan office harmony. Good. The first blow landed when they canceled the weekly development sync, replacing it with a vision alignment forum. No agenda, no code, just a 27-year-old VP named Troy droning about user-facing optimization pathways while I sat with my arms crossed, mentally calculating how many cups of coffee it would take to endure him. Troy didn't even glance at me once. A week later, a new organizational chart was released. My name was still there. Director of Strategic Initiatives. But something felt off. My team was split into 3. One half now reported to a consultant from Boston Consulting Group. The rest merged into Future Tech Engineering, which somehow had 4 directors and 0 tangible deliverables. I emailed David, the COO, for clarification. His reply was a single thumbs-up emoji. Then came the grand keynote. They booked a massive ballroom, flew in a camera crew, even hired a professional MC who had once hosted an awards show for startups. The presentation was streamed live on LinkedIn, all sharp transitions and soaring music. A full 10 minutes were dedicated to the company's signature financial suite, the very one I had meticulously built, line by painful line. The slides glowed with impressive metrics: 30% year-over-year growth, industry disruption, AI-driven architecture. But not once did anyone utter my name. Instead, Troy strutted onto the stage and declared, "The system emerged from a collaborative, multi-sourced innovation process led by our transformation team." He winked at the audience like a failed magician. I watched the screen from the break room, surrounded by colleagues clapping politely like a captive audience at a TV taping. My stomach churned, but my face remained impassive. I finished my coffee, rinsed my mug, and calmly walked back to my desk. That night, I poured myself a glass of Cabernet. So dry it nearly puckered my tongue. I sat in my dimly lit kitchen, the only illumination coming from the oven clock and a dying bulb in the hallway, and pulled out the manila folder. Clause 73.1b was still there. I read it once, then twice, letting the words sink in like an anesthetic. If the role of the undersigned is materially altered or reassigned without express mutual agreement, I retrieved a yellow highlighter from my junk drawer and dragged the tip slowly, deliberately across the sentence, as if it were a fuse. And I smiled, not a big, happy smile, but a sharp, clean one, like the initial click of a detonator. It was a Thursday, of course. It was always a Thursday. Corporate always makes their moves on Thursdays so the dust can settle over the weekend, and no one has to make awkward eye contact by the coffee machine on Friday. My Outlook pinged at 3:17 p.m. sharp. Quick touch base, HR and strategy. The 2 least honest phrases in the English language. I walked into the glass-walled conference room like someone collecting a debt. Inside sat Sarah from HR, blinking anxiously behind her pastel glasses, and a man I hadn't met before. He had the perpetual tan and calculated smile of someone who had never written a single line of code, but had once shouted disruptive synergy in an elevator pitch and landed a multi-million-dollar deal. "Luna," he said, rising just enough not to spill his latte. "I'm Chad. So excited about where you fit in the company's new vision." Sarah nodded with the desperation of someone who knew her next PowerPoint slide might be her last. Chad outlined my new role in polished, buzzword-laden strokes. Director of Digital Strategy. He beamed. Cross-functional, high-level alignment. We see you as a lighthouse, guiding innovation from a thought leadership perch. My face remained frozen, a masterpiece of practiced professionalism. My ears burned. My voice, velvet smooth, asked, "So, no direct reports?" Chad's smile tightened. "Well, not direct reports, per se. More of an influence through inspiration model. No budget, agile funding pools. You'll pitch internally like a startup." "And which systems will I own?" I pressed. "Well, think of it less as owning and more as enabling a mindset." In other words, I had just been handed a title with no team, no control, and no clear path back to actual relevance. They weren't promoting me, they were boxing me in, affixing a decorative plaque, and hoping I'd leave before I realized the oxygen was depleting. I nodded once. "Sounds exciting." Chad's eyebrows lifted like a dog hearing a treat bag crinkle. "You're okay with that?" "I've always wanted to be a lighthouse," I replied. Then I smiled, a long, slow, wild grin that made Sarah fidget with her bracelet. Afterward, I walked back to my desk, typed up my new role summary, saved it to a flash drive, and then quietly, surgically deleted 3 obsolete administrative credentials from the back end. No one noticed. No one ever noticed the things I did. I skipped my usual tea that night, pouring 2 fingers of bourbon instead. The good stuff. The one with a label that looked like an ancient manuscript. Then I opened the drawer. The folder was waiting, unassuming, quiet as a latent threat. I pulled out the contract, flipped to clause 7.3.1b, and ran a finger down the margin where my highlights still glowed like radioactive ink. Materially altered without mutual agreement. I called Ethan, my lawyer, whom I hadn't spoken to in over 4 years. He answered on the second ring, his voice unchanged, dry, sardonic, allergic to pretense. "You only call when bourbon's involved," he stated. "I just got promoted," I replied. A pause. "Ah." I faxed the contract to his private line while we remained on the call, listening to the mechanical hum of paper feeding through, listening to my own pulse in my ears. It had the same steady, rising rhythm my old code used when it looped through recursion, ready to break. Ethan's voice cut back in. "It's enforceable. You sure I drafted it, Luna?" I smirked. "You reviewed it. Fine. You wrote it, I spell-checked it. Still airtight. Then let's light the fuse." He whistled softly. "Okay, let me find my checkbook. You want it to look old, like I never forgot?" Then I hung up, sat in the dark with my bourbon, watching my reflection in the microwave door. I looked calm, and that was terrifying. The letter was printed on heavyweight bond paper, the kind law firms use when they want the words to command attention before the envelope is even opened. Ethan didn't just draft it, he curated it. Every sentence trimmed like bonsai. No flourish, no room for misinterpretation, just cold, contractual precision. Enclosed was a cashier's check dated 8 years back, pulled from an escrow account I had established just in case. $100, payable to a company that now floated on a $50 million valuation, like a blimp constructed of ego and buzzwords. I triple-checked the envelope, sealed it, and wrote the address by hand in my clean, utilitarian cursive. There's something intimate about destruction when it's delivered in pen. "Send it certified," Ethan had instructed. "Already did," I replied. "And I have the tracking number taped to my coffee mug." Ethan chuckled. "You scare me sometimes, Luna." I leaned back in my kitchen chair, the wood creaking under years of solitude. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel it. Not rage, not fear, but that slow, coiling joy that only stems from a plan older than your adversaries. By Sunday, I had filled a page in my notebook with one-word names. First was Chloe, an intern from 4 summers ago who used to bring in matcha tea and ask questions that genuinely mattered. She had since grown into a formidable technical talent, freelancing between dev contracts and resenting every moment of it. We met in the back booth of a diner that smelled of fryer grease and yesterday's coffee. I laid out the pitch in 20 words or less. Chloe didn't hesitate. Are you asking me to help you burn it down or build it better? Yes. Chloe nodded. I'm in. Next was Kevin, a sleepy-eyed IP attorney who owed me for bailing him out of a version control disaster back in 2017. He worked out of a co-op office now, wore mismatched socks, and still called me Maestro. You didn't even ask me what the product is, I noted. I don't care, he replied. You've never built garbage, and I assume they don't realize what they've given away. They will soon, he grinned, holding up his phone. I've already reserved the new domain. Also grab the Twitter handle and https www.google.com search thelawsuitiscoming.com just for fun. Then came the big ask, venture capital. I didn't want a lot, not yet, just enough to signal strength, enough to be taken seriously. My pick was Isabella, a former DevOps engineer turned microfund powerhouse who believed in ugly code that produced beautiful results. I sent a 3-line email. Isabella responded in 11 minutes with a subject line that simply read, "Where and when?" We met in a parking garage. For heaven's sake, level 3B? Isabella smoked filtered cigarettes and kept her term sheet folded in her back pocket like a bar napkin. So, she said, exhaling smoke shaped like wolves. Tell me something your old company doesn't want me to know. I pulled a flash drive from my coat pocket. The core system hasn't been updated in 2 years. Not structurally, not meaningfully. They've been layering integrations, API wrappers, just lipstick. Isabella whistled. The bones are yours. Every line. I smiled. I still have the build scripts. I know exactly where their tech debt lives. I know the back doors they forgot to close. I know the patch they never pushed because the CTO was golfing when the bug report came in. Can you replicate it? She asked. Better, I said. I can evolve it. Isabella held out her hand. No paperwork, no fuss. Just old school trust. Let's make them bleed. By Sunday, I had a working team of 5. Small, quiet, ruthless. I used burner emails, built wireframes under false names, created a staging environment on a forgotten subdomain I had registered 10 years ago. While the old company boasted about scaling innovation, I was in my garage, writing version 2.0.0 with the same keyboard I'd used for the prototype. Letters faded, spacebar cracked, but still mine. The best part? They hadn't even noticed I'd stopped committing code. Not a peep, no questions. Just another cog in their lighthouse. I knew then what I hadn't allowed myself to admit until now. I didn't want my job back. I wanted the kingdom. The envelope hit the legal department's inbox at 9:03 a.m. on a Monday, certified, signature required. The intern who signed for it didn't even glance at the return address. He was late for a diversity workshop and assumed it was just another patent troll letter, one of a dozen they received every quarter. He tossed it on a paralegal's desk, where it sat under a stack of flagged contract redlines and someone's half-eaten bagel. It wasn't opened until 11:46 a.m. when Teresa from In-House Legal peeled it open one-handed while trying to refill the office coffee maker. She read the cover letter once, blinked, then again, slower, her hand hovering above the brew button as if she'd forgotten how coffee worked. A check fluttered out, neat, pristine, dated 8 years ago. She turned it over as if it might explode. By 12:12 p.m., Marco, the head of corporate legal, had cleared his calendar. He paced his office in socked feet, holding the contract up like it was a cursed scroll. There were sticky notes attached to the corners of every page, yellow, red, blue. One simply read, "What? This isn't real," he muttered, pacing. "It's real," Teresa said. "We verified her signature. We pulled the contract from the archive. It's been there the whole time. But nobody saw this clause?" Marco pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's buried, footnote, Section 7.3.1, Sub BB, titled Material Role Alteration and Assignment Reversion. Jesus Christ, sounds like furniture assembly. Technically, we all did, Teresa confirmed. At 1:06 p.m., they sent a calendar invite. Leadership stand-up. Urgent. I didn't accept it. At 1:18 p.m., Chad, the same smug VP who had given me the lighthouse tone speech, called my cell. I picked up on the second ring. My voice was calm. Too calm. Luna. Hey, we've got a quick sync happening now. Mind jumping in? I'm not attending, I said flatly. There was a pause. Confusion sharpened Chad's voice. Don't follow. Regarding the transfer notice I filed this morning, I said, with all the joy of reading an IRS audit aloud. I'm no longer involved with that product. Chad sputtered. Wait, hold on. What transfer? What product? The financial analytics suite. My tone didn't rise, didn't falter. I've exercised my reversion rights under Clause 7.3.1b of our Asset Acquisition Agreement, dated April 12th, 8 years ago. Chad went silent for too long. Luna, I think there's been a miscommunication. No, I said. There's been a miscalculation. Click. I hung up before he could fumble another excuse, silenced my phone, locked my laptop, and leaned back in my chair with the stillness of someone who knew the next chess piece was going to fall without her lifting a finger. The first sign of panic wasn't public. It was logistical. At 2:03 p.m., someone tried to deploy a scheduled patch to the main system. They received a failure message. Build script deprecated. I had pulled the core deployment key hours earlier. At 2:47 p.m., the engineering lead pinged DevOps for a clarification on IP architecture. No one knew how to answer. I had built the schema documentation, and the last update was time-stamped over 700 days ago. At 3:12 p.m., the CTO called a private meeting with the board's technical advisor. There were whispers. A clause had been triggered, the source code contested, ownership unclear. Suddenly, every compliance officer was digging through backups, desperate to prove they'd meaningfully modified the system. They hadn't, not once. The product that fueled investor decks and retention slides, it was mine again. And while they sweated through NDA reviews and retention policy loopholes, I sat in my apartment, sipping tea and tweaking line 642 of my new interface module. It was a small change, subtle, elegant, impossible to replicate without my notes. But that line, it sang. The boardroom smelled like a courtroom, and panic had started to permeate the stale air. It was Tuesday, 7:42 a.m., and every seat at the polished table was filled, half of them executives who hadn't bothered with ties, the other half lawyers who hadn't slept. Marco stood at the head, his tie loose, his voice cracking like a weatherman predicting a hurricane after it had already made landfall. She owns it, he stated. Silence. Then the CFO, red-faced and wheezing through a large energy drink, snapped, The core platform? Yes, legally it reverted under the terms of the original asset agreement from... I don't care if it was signed in blood under a lunar eclipse. David, the COO, snarled. Fix it! Marco didn't flinch. We can't. It's airtight. It was filed, certified, dated. We acknowledged receipt. There's no loophole. There's no opt-out. You promoted her without mutual agreement, and that triggered the clause. The CTO slid a USB across the table like it was cursed. We've done a code diff. 90% of the system is still her original architecture. We've added wrappers, analytics, UI fluff, but structurally, it's hers. Heck, half our microservices are nested in her original logic, and we don't have the original notes she wrote, most of them in undocumented Markdown. And even if we had them, we still don't have Luna. By 9 a.m., Marco had drafted a 4-paragraph internal memo describing the situation as a temporary licensing clarification. It used the word strategic 6 times and said nothing meaningful. Legal vetoed a press release. Instead, they briefed the client success team on customer containment strategies. It didn't work. By 10:27 a.m., the company's largest enterprise client requested a formal statement of IP ownership. They didn't like clarifications. They liked contracts. They threatened to withhold Q3 payment unless the matter was resolved within 2 weeks. By 11:11 a.m., another client asked if they could get a refund for their professional license, citing ownership uncertainty. By 11:35 a.m., one of the investors sent a terse email. What the hell happened? By noon, stockholders on the private equity side were calling in favors from former government officials to see if any of this could be classified as intentional non-disclosure. It couldn't. The clause was real. The oversight was theirs. I was silent. I didn't tweet, didn't leak, didn't gloat. I just kept building. I had a secure chat group with 5 names in it, a Git repository protected like a vault, a version number that was already 2 iterations ahead of the one they were still trying to salvage. I read the articles as they appeared, whispers of IP trouble at Apex Innovations. Key developer absent from leadership statements. Is the software boom built on shaky ground? I didn't reply to requests for comment. I just walked down to the county clerk's office on Wednesday, wearing jeans and a jacket that smelled faintly of solder and jasmine laundry detergent. I took a number, sat in a chair between a teenager applying for a DBA called Innovate Hub and a tax consultant picking up a cease and desist. When they called my number, I stepped up and filed a trademark. New logo, new product name, clean lines, no techie overkill, just a name that mattered. One I'd saved since I first started scribbling command flows on pizza boxes and old utility bills. The clerk stamped the form. You're all set, Miss Hayes. I nodded. I got home that night. My inbox had 36 unread messages from executives, lawyers, and someone named Chief Resilience Officer. I didn't open them. Instead, I stared at my code window, watching the syntax highlight like stained glass. I felt a flicker of guilt. Then I remembered the keynote. No name, no credit, just suits high-fiving each other with words they stole from my effort. I poured another glass of wine. Guilt was a fleeting storm, but satisfaction was climate. They filed in federal court on a Friday afternoon, hoping the late news cycle would bury it. Apex Innovations, Vive Hayes. The title alone reeked of corporate desperation. The lawsuit read like a tantrum disguised in Times New Roman. Bad faith, abuse of contractual loopholes, intentional sabotage, and the kitchen sink dressed as a footnote. Their argument, that the clause was never meant to be literal, that I had acted in non-cooperative spirit, that my promotion was strategic alignment, not a material demotion. They accused me of weaponizing legal technicalities to inflict reputational damage. Ethan called me when he read it. They used weaponize 3 times, he noted. Someone's been reading too many think pieces. I didn't laugh. I was already reviewing the counterbrief. I didn't need to say much. The contract was clear. My role had been changed without consent. My duties revoked. My authority evaporated. And then there were the emails. Discovery unearthed them like worms under a wet rock. One from Chad, 3 weeks before my promotion. We've got to move her out without triggering a meltdown. Give her a title she can frame and forget. Another from the CTO to David, the COO. Call it a lighthouse role. She'll either retire or get the hint. And a third, more direct, from an unnamed executive in a group thread titled Legacy Drain. Get her off the product. She's dead weight. Let her play pretend strategist until Q4. My legal team didn't have to embellish. They just printed the emails and let the rot speak for itself. In court, their lawyers wore tailored sorrow and gritted smiles. I wore a blazer that still had a thread from my old office chair caught in the cuff. My presence was precise, my voice steady. Even the judge, a woman who had ruled on enough tech cases to smell posturing through polished teeth, read the documents in silence. Then she looked up. So, let me get this straight, she said. You altered her title, revoked her team, removed her access to the product she built, and now claim she acted in bad faith by exercising a clause you signed? The silence that followed was profound. I'm denying the injunction, the judge stated, barely suppressing her exhaustion. Clause 731B is valid and enforceable and was triggered by your own actions. This court sees no evidence of bad faith on the defendant's part, only a failure of corporate memory. Apex Innovations' lead counsel tried to speak. She cut him off. If you wanted to keep the golden goose, you shouldn't have put her in a cage and called it a nest. Case dismissed. I walked out into the marble hall with cameras flashing. I didn't answer a single question, just nodded once and kept walking, my heels clicking like a metronome on the tile. Back at my workspace, no longer a kitchen table but an actual office with drywall and a potted plant I hadn't killed yet, Chloe had built out the last of the onboarding module. Kevin was reviewing the IP filings for a clean chain of custody. Isabella, our VC firestarter, was already scheduling meetings with 3 more investors who didn't need to be told twice who built what. In our secure chat group, someone posted, V1.0, release, pipeline finalized, 30 days MVP locked. I didn't celebrate. I just typed, no blockers, proceed. Then I closed my laptop, leaned back, and looked out the window. Real daylight this time, a skyline not shaped by other people's names. I was steeled now, not defensive, not wounded, but ready. They had tried to bury me, but all they'd done was plant a fuse. There was no launch party, no confetti-ridden tweet storm, no corporate influencer with manicured fingernails screeching about disruption. I preferred it that way. On a Tuesday at 2:00 a.m., the servers flipped from staging to live. The DNS propagated, and the homepage blinked awake. Black text, white background, no animation, no pretense, just a single line, built by the hands that built it first. The product, renamed Zenith Insights, offered a cleaner interface, a leaner backend, and genuine human support. It didn't promise miracles. It promised to work. And it did. By Wednesday morning, the ripples had begun. First came the tech lead from Global Finance Partners, Apex Innovations' second-largest enterprise client. His email was blunt. Is this real? I replied. If you're asking if the product's stable, yes. If you're asking if I'm the one who built it, also yes. He replied 2 hours later with a simple, we'll be in touch. Then came a VP from Sterling Holdings, another legacy account. He wasn't looking for drama. He was looking for uptime. I sent him a sandbox login with no sales pitch, just credentials. Next came Vertex Capital, then Nexus Advisors, then a company I didn't recognize but whose CTO used to beg me for access tokens 3 years ago. They all came to me. I didn't advertise, I didn't call in favors. I let the Whisper network do its work. Meanwhile, Apex Innovations' marketing team tried desperately to do damage control. They posted a glossy LinkedIn update featuring 3 white guys in fleece vests standing in front of a monitor displaying Quantum Leap 4.0. The caption used the word visionary twice. Comments were turned off. At 10:42 a.m., Chloe, now CTO, now legend, tweeted a single sentence from the official Zenith Insights account. Version 2.0 by the original team. No tags, no hashtags, no mentions. But it caught like dry pine in a lightning storm. Dozens of senior engineers from across the industry retweeted with quiet reverence. A few whispered replies said it out loud. We wondered what happened to her. This explains the silence. Never underestimate the quiet person in the corner with the keyboard. Inside Apex Innovations, panic was no longer theoretical. The CTO stormed into a board call, red-eyed and hoarse. They're siphoning our enterprise base. The system she released is already running faster than ours. 2 clients have flagged performance comparisons. We're losing ground. Chad tried to laugh it off. We'll just relaunch with a better UI until someone handed him a printed version of the Zenith Insights onboarding flow. 4 steps, Zero friction. Launch ready in under 20 minutes. We know what her pipeline looks like, the COO stated. Ask the CFO. 30 days of content, 6-month feature queue. They've got Git activity on weekends. She's running a wartime cadence. The CFO looked like he hadn't slept since the injunction ruling, his jaw clenched, his knuckles pale on the glass of the table. She's not bleeding us, he said. She's replacing us. Silence fell like a shroud. One board member finally spoke. We need an emergency strategy session. It was scheduled for 6 a.m. the next day. No catering, no slides, just dread. Meanwhile, across town, I stood barefoot on the balcony of my modest office space, watching morning fog roll across the concrete jungle. I sipped my coffee, warm and bitter, and watched the Zenith Insights Analytics dashboard on my tablet. 3 more enterprise inquiries. 15 inbound support questions. 0 churn. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just whispered to myself, they're coming. Not as a warning, but as a prophecy. They say no one ever sees the iceberg coming until it's in the rearview mirror. But that morning, the morning the Apex Innovations Board finally grasped the depth of their self-inflicted wound, it didn't feel like an iceberg. It felt like gravity giving up. At 6:02 a.m., the emergency board meeting began. No pleasantries, no jokes, just silence and numbers that refused to lie. The lead analyst put it bluntly. 73% of our annual recurring revenue is tied to Luna's platform. The rest is unscalable fluff, consulting contracts, and vaporware slides. The CEO, damp under the collar and red from whatever had kept him upright the night before, barked, "But we've still got the brand, the reputation!" The analyst just tilted his laptop forward. On the screen, a screenshot of the Zenith Insights onboarding page. Beneath it, a series of live comments from CTOs across the sector. Faster load times than Apex. Their support actually solves problems. Signed the pilot deal in under 30 minutes. Beneath that, a bar graph. It showed a slow bleed of enterprise users abandoning Apex. The top 2 defectors were clients they'd once bragged about in press releases. The third, a Fortune 50 name that hadn't even notified them before disappearing into my ecosystem. "Gentlemen," the analyst said, "we're not competing with her. We're being digested." At 8:23 a.m., Apex Innovations stock, already limping from a month of whispers and press speculation, took its first cliff dive. A financial blog leaked that a foundational IP dispute had not only not been resolved, but had escalated. By 9:17 a.m., the stock was in freefall. Several institutional investors began dumping shares, citing existential risk. Layoffs started by noon. No one was warned. Chat access just vanished, emails bounced, middle managers cried in stairwells. They were told to cut overhead aggressively, and they did. By dinner, 2 whole teams were gone, and Sarah, the HR representative who had delivered my promotion, was escorted out, carrying a succulent and a mousepad that said, "Keep calm and synergize." And I? I was across town, in a skyscraper made of light and brushed steel, sitting at a mahogany table with 3 partners from Corsair Capital, a private equity firm known for moving fast and leaving scorch marks. The deal was simple. They wanted equity, I wanted velocity. They offered $20 million, I countered at 40. They blinked and signed. A champagne bottle appeared moments later, handed off with a nod from the junior associate who'd Googled my name the night before and whispered, "I think she's the one who wrote Quantum Leap." I didn't correct him. I stood, bottle in hand, and walked through the glass doors with my team in tow. Chloe grinning like she just hacked the Pentagon, Kevin already rewriting the IP licensing model for expansion, and Isabella making calls to line up Series B before the ink dried. Outside, the city was waking up under a lavender sky. And I felt it, that shift. Not adrenaline, not vengeance, just gravity pulling me back to where I'd always belonged. I stopped at a crosswalk, cars buzzing past like bees on caffeine. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. A notification. Market alert. Apex Innovations stock down 37%. Another one. New competitor takes market by storm. Founder Luna Hayes. I tapped the screen once, then powered it off. The cork popped 5 minutes later. Clean, elegant, final. This story of Luna Hayes reminds us that true value often lies hidden, unacknowledged by those who benefit from it. Luna's journey highlights the importance of self-worth and strategic foresight. Even when faced with professional betrayal and corporate maneuvering, her quiet dedication and meticulous planning allowed her to reclaim what was rightfully hers. The key lesson here is to never underestimate your own worth or the power of your foundational contributions. Always protect your intellectual property and understand the long-term implications of any agreements you make. Furthermore, it demonstrates that integrity and genuine skill will ultimately prevail over empty corporate jargon and superficial titles. When the dust settled, it wasn't the fancy presentations or the buzzwords that sustained the company, but Luna's solid, reliable code. For anyone feeling undervalued or sidelined, this story is a testament to patience, resilience, and the quiet strength of knowing your true capabilities. Success isn't always about being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's about diligently building, learning, and waiting for the right moment to act decisively. Believe in your journey, nurture your creations, and when the time comes, reclaim your narrative.